Thank you very much. That doesn't look like the actual slide I was expecting, so it must be a different file. That's great, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. How could we miss such a presentation? Because Stokab seems to always come back to my mind, actually. Each time I go to a conference traveling across Europe and people, turn to me and say, but in terms of public-driven type of investment, do you have really a role model you would can come up with and advise? And the first name that comes to my mind is always Stokab. There is something about what happens in Sweden, which is not just the results of good seminars like today, and in a way the pride of being a successful model and trying to promote it outside. There is really something very important which is going on. And the attention that those kind of cases raise is not by chance at this very moment. There is a wide awareness across all political decision makers that broadband, high-speed broadband, is a necessity for our century. And this is, I think, one of those things that was not that obvious just a few years ago when people like Ulla and others in those Nordic countries started to really get the knowledge, the understanding of what has to be done from a public policy viewpoint. Let's move on to the slides. I will just have a few. Can I point with this? Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Okay, so where do we start from as of now? I think this is important always to know before we know where we want to get where we come from. The digital agenda strategy in 2010 was for the first time setting a very clear target in terms of broadband. And by 2020 we have two headlines targets. One is about coverage and another one is about take-up. There is a subtlety obviously between these, but one is definitely about 30 megabit type of coverage, so accessible networks to everyone in Europe, so really ubiquitous networks around those speeds. What we call, let's say, that's really the threshold for the so-called next generation networks. And the take-up, which is more ambitious in terms of speed, 100 megabit per second, and this is real actual subscription, so people actually subscribing, and the figures that Ulla was recalling in Sweden are quite impressive indeed. When people are being offered at reasonable prices 100 megabit, they would obviously go for it. The targets set in the digital agenda are manifold, and I'm not sure you can actually read that slide. The ones related to broadband are the two at the top for fast and ultra-fast broadband. And as you can see, reaching the target, that is reaching the far right hand of the slide, is quite a challenge. We're 4 years after the strategy was adopted, and the 30 megabit target is only at a 62 coverage in Europe. Those figures date back from beginning of 2014, end of 2013. And the take-up figures are even more dramatically low, in the order of 3% at EU level. Obviously, this covers a wide variety of situations, and if you look at the actual next generation broadband coverage, you can see that the member states are certainly not equal in terms of coverage of the new generation of technologies. The EU level is in blue here, and you see Sweden is actually well placed, however with a big caveat, which is that of rural broadband. And I think this is also to be noticed, that some models are obviously more in a way suited to face situation in an urban environment, but obviously the challenges of the rural areas in Nordic countries is particularly great, and this is obviously showing in those figures where actually in rural areas the EU average is actually higher than in Sweden. But when it takes to subscription indicators, you can definitely see that Sweden is in the lead among the best countries, which is again one of those achievements that should showcase the model for other member states. So what's the way forward? If we want to meet those targets, they are really challenging, and obviously, as at EU level, we have the traditional two sets of instruments at our disposal: the regulatory instruments and the financial support. Starting with the regulatory part, we started to address this with a new piece of legislation, the so-called Connected Continent. And this piece of legislation is still undergoing negotiation in Council and Parliament. I would say, obviously, it will not solve all problems. And in a way, it was already acknowledged by the new president, the incoming president of the Commission, President Juncker, that more had to be done with the regulatory, the telecom single market issue. And so those headings which are being presented here are obviously, let's say, a step-by-step approach, and we are confident that Parliament and Council will take all the necessary steps in order to finalize those negotiations. It will likely be a somewhat reduced scope for this piece of legislation that we had initially proposed. However, it will actually be an opportunity to make another step in the right direction. It will not just solve issues related to broadband. It is also covering issues such as net neutrality, roaming, and other also acute issues. We have the objective is obviously to have a single digital market, and the announcement made by the President is that within 6 months of the entry into force of this Commission, so that's in the spring 2015, new proposals will be made. And obviously it is not for me at this very moment to unveil any plans as to what this proposal will be, but this is actively, obviously, being discussed within our services, and it is a right moment, let's say, for new ideas to emerge. And I think seminars like today are a good opportunity to have this exchange of views. The Cost Reduction Directive is another piece of legislation which has been adopted in May this year, which is meant to address a particular, direct consequence of the way broadband networks are being rolled out, which is acknowledging the fact that 80% of the cost is made of civil works, and this cost can be reduced by, I would say, common sense measures, better coordination, and better publicity, cross-sector type of cooperation, so that the utility companies can also make available their ducts to the operators of the telecom networks. That single databases are being made available, so that all this information is centralized and accessible to the operators. And we have also a number of other measures related to in-wiring for buildings, so making them broadband ready for the new generations. So all these elements, let's say, are already embedded in the new regulation, in the new directive. However, they will only be put in place by 2016. The transposition time is beginning of 2016, and then the measures will actually start to be making effects from mid 2016 onwards. Obviously, that doesn't prevent us to already implement those measures. It takes time, obviously, to set up databases, to ensure coordination between utilities, to map all these infrastructures. So this is obviously a moment which should not be idle. It is a moment really to prepare the entry into force of this directive. On cost reductions, the potential savings are up to 30%. So we're talking in terms of billions, obviously, if you put it at the scale of Europe. Public financing, besides the regulatory dimension, is obviously the other set of instruments that Europe has at its disposal to act and try to promote investment in broadband. I will just mention basically two particularly prominent instruments. The Connecting Europe facility, which is a new instrument that has been set up again across sectors, so energy, transports, and telecom, in order to have the use of financial instruments. Promoting those kind of new ways to fund projects has a potential, again, of leverage effect, which goes up to 15% from if you take the ratio between public investment and private investments. But the design of such projects is obviously more difficult. We have already, in a way, made a demonstration case in approving one project bond project this year, but there will be more of those loans, equities, venture capital type of design for business cases, which will hopefully showcase the budget for CEF has been dramatically reduced during the negotiations on the financial framework, but we have 150 million available for those kind of very innovative projects, and hopefully that will attract long-term investors to the telecom sectors, which is the policy goal we have behind this instrument. And then we have the well-known European structural and investment funds. The structural funds, which is the traditional very big pot of money, targeting regions. Here we're starting from a situation where broadband in the last programming period before 2014 was certainly not a priority. It's in the order of 2.2 billion, the programming allocation to broadband projects that happened in the last 7 years. We are hopeful that this figure will at least double and probably increase even further in the new programming period. Obviously, the instruments of the structural funds is used to be used through grants, which is not really conducive to high leverage on the private investment. However, we are confident that also with the new guidance of the President Juncker, those practices will actually evolve towards more and more financial instruments type of actions in the broadband sector. What next? I mentioned already several times the President and the new set of commissioners which are relevant to that policy area. So as you know, we have now a triangle of commissioners, Commissioner Oettinger being responsible primarily for the digital economy and society portfolio, and two vice presidents. So for the digital single market, Vice President Ansip, who is again responsible for that project in the next 6 months, and the proposal that will emerge from that, and Vice President Katainen, who is also responsible for, in a way, an even more directly important package, the so-called 300 billion euros of public and private investment, which will be announced. The first announcement should happen before Christmas and in the early month of next year. So the proposal will be very ambitious. It is obviously too early for me to tell you what shape it will take. However, there is clearly a new momentum in the sector as a result of those announcements, and we will not have 300 billion for broadband only. It will cover again a number of sectors, but clearly now the political focus on the need to make the extra push in order to reach the broadband targets is definitely there. Let me finish the presentation with a couple of small items, but which I think have been the seeds of what will be coming next in our policy areas. Because in a way, beyond the funding and beyond the regulatory tools, it is important actually that this momentum I was referring to is actually shapen up in a way which is conducive to models like the ones in Sweden being truly experienced elsewhere, and really the exchange of experiences is key. We have set up what we call the Connected Communities Initiative, which was a call for interest, which closed last month, which was meant to have some sort of bottom-up pipeline, people who felt frustrated not to be able to roll out their project were called to simply to register online. And the idea is to have technical assistance provided to these people. In some cases, it may be simply putting them into the networks of interested contacts. In other cases, it might be a real technical assistance with the help of international financial institutions in order to really get deep into the project and see how it can be shapen up in such a way to be conducive, for instance, to CEF funding, so becoming a really financial engineering type of business model. We have also recently published the so-called high-speed broadband investment guide, and Christer, who was one of the drafters behind this very important work, will tell you more about it in a few minutes. The important thing is that this guide is, again, the updating of a version that was published 2 years ago, but it is really meant to be a hands-on type of document for local authorities, for people who simply do not have any prior knowledge of what the jargon about the sector is, and how to get to the point really to be able to ask the right question to your local telecom operators. I mean, this is really to empower the local authorities. We have also another important piece of guidance, which is a guide on state aids. As you know, it is key that at the time of planning such investments, local authorities understand well what the constraints of state aids can be, but also the opportunities. And I think it is this kind of document that will help people acquire the necessary knowledge in order to be able, again, to find out their way through the various options that are offered for anyone who wants to try the adventure of bringing new networks to the community. Last but not least, because in a way this website called Broadband Europe is actually a focal point for all these initiatives, we have started to publish online on our website a number of important data, and so all those guides, you will find them there, of course, but we're also trying to showcase in a way the best practices. And this is also something I will want to finish upon. We're reaching the time where it is very important that the best practices are not just discussed in seminars, in a few circles being invited and interested in those matters really get there in Brussels, but really reaching out the many people who live in the peripheries of their own national or regional settings. And this is really where we will win the battle of covering the whole of Europe. It is important that this networking finds ways and discussions and networks so that the best practices can actually be taught to those who are lagging behind. And we are hopeful that this broadband website will become more and more interactive. We will add new features in the coming month so that people will be able to actually showcase their own experience online and exchange experience directly with other people, depending on the business models they would be most interested in. And I will stop here and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.